Today I'm going to share some tips and suggestions on how to succeed in chemistry. It can be a very challenging course to some students, but it is possible to succeed with a little bit of planning and effort on the part of the student. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Remember, when you're studying, don't have a lot of distractions. If it means putting your phone in the other room or turning off the TV, do that so you can concentrate on the work at hand. You'll be much more successful if you can focus on the material. So how do we fit this all in? Remember, there are 168 hours in a week. If you plan your time well, you will have no problem fitting in classes, studying, leisure activities, sleeping, eating, always important. And if we look at this schedule here, we've spent about a third of the week on classes and studying. This is about the equivalent of a full-time job. It does mean that we have to do a little bit of planning and figure out when we're going to do that studying, but it is possible to be involved in lots of different activities, including having a part-time job, and do all your work for your class. Let's compare studying to learning to drive a car. You didn't learn to drive in one day. You might have learned how to do one or two things each time you drove, and you probably made a few mistakes, but you learned from those mistakes. You rear-ended somebody, you'll learn to hit the brakes a little bit sooner and not follow so closely. We can do the same thing in chemistry. Just like when you learned to drive, you didn't learn everything in one day and then take the test the next day. You practiced a little bit every day, at least several times a week, and you started out with basic skills, and then you added more complicated things like parallel parking. But you still had to practice those old skills, the things you learned at the beginning. You had to keep doing and add in the new skills. One other thing we tend to do when we're studying is be distracted by the idea of studying. We tell people we have to study, we know we need to study, but we never get around to actually doing it. So time management is going to be a critical part of your success in chemistry. You need to take the time to make a schedule. Plan, when are you going to study for chemistry? When are you going to study for biology? When are you going to do the reading for your WRD class? Make sure that you make a plan and you follow it. One way to help do this is to study most subjects every day. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, meaning don't plan on Saturday being the only day you're going to study chemistry and you're going to do chemistry all day. What happens when something comes up on Saturday? You want to go to a game, or you're sick and don't feel like doing anything. Now you've lost all of your chemistry study time. And after a while, you're going to get brain fatigue from doing just chemistry. I'm a chemist, and the idea of doing chemistry problems all day doesn't really appeal to me, so I'm guessing it's probably not going to be a successful approach for most students. If you plan your time, so studying every subject every day, this will be a much more effective way to learn material. A good rule of thumb for study time is 3-to-1, study time to class time. For example, chemistry is a 4-credit-hour course. You're spending 3 hours per credit, so you should be spending about 12 hours per week on chemistry. And we'll talk in a minute about the different activities you can do in those 12 hours. But think of it this way. If you spend that 12 hours a week every week, come exam week, you really won't be having to put more study time in because you've been learning the material and practicing the concepts all along. And so you're just doing some final review and learning any new material in the last few days. Within the study time for each subject, we also want to do a variety of activities. Let's say we've designated 6 to 8 every day as our study time for chemistry class. I'm not going to spend that 2 hours doing just reading or just reviewing my notes or just doing practice problems. I want to do a variety of activities to avoid brain fatigue. Note that about half the time spent studying chemistry is actually spent on homework problems and practice problems. That's because the best way to learn chemistry is actually to do these problems. It makes you think about concepts in a variety of ways and problem solve to figure out how to get to the answer. So what do you do in those 12 hours? One of the first things you can do is actually read before coming to class. Look over the material that will be covered in the next class period so you're at least familiar with the terminology and have some idea of the concepts that are going to be covered. You are not expected to understand the material completely just from the reading. Another thing to do is reviewing and annotating your notes. This is best done as soon after class as possible. Go back through, Add extras, draw in pictures that you didn't quite finish, and do any other changes of things that you missed during class. It's also an excellent time to write down questions such as in the margin so that you can follow up on those questions later. These can be anything from why did we use a 2 in this calculation to what does this concept mean? Some students find it helpful to rewrite their notes. This gives them opportunity to re-explain things to themselves in different words in a way that they understand. Flashcards are helpful for things such as memorizing polyatomic ions, and these also can be done on paper or on your smartphone. Homework will be a big part of that 12 hours. Don't wait until the last minute to do your homework so that you have time to get help on any questions you're struggling with before the due date in time. The end of chapter problems are a big source of help for students. I recommend that students do as many as possible, preferably all of them. And yes, I do know that there are more than 100 questions on each chapter. But this is your most valuable tool for practicing to make sure you understand the concepts. Before you get to the exam, you should be able to open up the book, point to any problem at the end of the chapter, and be able to solve it without help from looking at an example, asking someone else, or talking to your instructor. So make sure you do lots of practice problems and get to the point where you can do them independently. And don't forget to ask questions, whether it be from another student, from your TA, or from your instructor. Make sure you get all your questions answered. It can also be helpful to answer questions. If you're working in a study group, quiz each other, ask each other questions. When you can explain a concept to someone else so that they understand it, that shows that you know the material as well. One thing to remember is that it's okay to make mistakes. In fact, we probably learn more from making mistakes than if we get a problem correct on the first attempt. By looking back at where you made a mistake and figuring out why it's wrong and what it should be instead is going to be an important tool to help you learn how to solve chemistry problems. Everybody makes mistakes. Use them as a tool to help you learn.